Okay. We are
You're
live.
ready?
Awesome.
Okay, welcome everyone to tonight's City Council meeting. We are a little bit late, past our 6:30 start time, working out some other technical difficulties, but we're ready to go now. It is Thursday, April 16th, 2020. And we are meeting remotely via a Zoom application. We're going to forego for the period that we're going remotely, our invocation and flag salute. It's a little more difficult to coordinate that with any kind of meeting. So we're going to go to item 3 first on our agenda, but I need to make an announcement first that we've had 2 executive sessions since our last council meeting 2 weeks ago. We had one council executive session on Sunday, April 5th, and we had one Thursday, April 9th. Both were dealing with personnel and contract legal issues. So that little business is out of the way. I'm going to announce who's in the meeting tonight. From council, myself, Randy Allison, Councilwoman Bonnie Katz, Councilman Adam Yoder, Councilwoman Liz Mealy, Councilman John Mackey, Councilman Dave Banks, and Councilman Vince Palizzi. Mayor Derek Slaughter will be joining if he's not in already. Our city clerk, Janice Frank, city solicitor, Norm Lubin, city IT, Chris Cooley, Chief Hagan, Stephanie Young from our development department, CDBG, Joe Pavlak, finance, Chris Hopkins is doing the closed captioning tonight, Chief Killian, Adam Winder, Nick Grimes, city treasurer. Did I miss anybody?
John Sanders.
Oh, John Sanders, city engineer. I don't have everyone on my screen, so couldn't see that. Okay, I think we got that out of the way. We're going to move to item 3. Mr. Cooley, should we be able to see the closed captioning ourselves?
You should be. I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay. Okay, the mayor just informed me that, so I'm going to announce this now. We will be having an he's requesting an executive session to discuss legal matters, personnel wise. So we do have that. So we're still working on the closed captioning. I apologize that we don't have that going just yet. Okay, we're going to move to item 3, approval of city council minutes dated April 2nd, 2020. Is there a motion from council?
So move.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Are there questions, comments? Hearing none, then on the motion, Mrs. Frank?
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Palizzi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz, Mrs. Katz,
It's not working.
You're unmuted now.
Okay, yes.
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mr. Allison,
Yes. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. And I see that we have the closed captioning working now. We'll move to item 4, limited courtesy of the floor. We've had no requests tonight. We'll move to item 5 then. Ordinance amending Article 195 blighted property. Could you read that in short form, please, Mrs. Frank?
Ordinance amending Article 195, Blighted Property Review Committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. And this is the second reading of this ordinance. Mr. Girardi? Are you
He's on
here?
his way.
Oh, okay.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Mr. Girardi has now joined the meeting. Your ordinance is up for second reading, Mr. Girardi, blighted property review, and just
Yes,
it's a matter of
Like we said, basically, we updated the Blighted Property Review Committee, adding 2 more members, making it a total of 7, and just organizing the verbiage a little bit better than what it was.
Thank you, Mr. Girardi. Any questions or comments from council? So everyone's not on my screen at the same time, so I'm going to pause after I ask that question to make sure I don't miss anybody. But hearing none, could we have the vote, Mrs. Frank, please?
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Motion passes 7-0. We're going to move now to items, I'm sorry. Oh, items 6 through 13, which are all second readings of closing and amending CDBG home budgets that we passed in first reading at last meeting. So our solicitor, Norm Lubin, has said we can take them as a whole. So we will do that tonight. Is there a motion and a second to take
moved.
items 6 through 13?
So move. Second.
There's a motion and a second. So Mrs. Young, do you have any further things to say about these?
Just to recap from the last meeting, the first 5 ordinances close out the home program budgets for program years 2011 through 2015. And the home budgets for 2016, 17, and 18 will remain open. And we're also transferring $35,354.80 from the 2018 home projects activity to the 2018 Choto activity.
Thank you, Mrs. Young. Any more comments or questions from council tonight? Okay, hearing none on those items then, Mrs. Frank, please.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes. Motion passes 7-0. And thank you, Mrs. Frank. We'll now move to item 14, a resolution to approve Community Conservation Partnership Program grant. Could you read that in short form, please, Mrs. Frank?
Resolution to approve a Community Conservation and Partnerships Programs grant application to the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources for the Low School Park Rehabilitation Project.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion and a second from council?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Mrs. Young.
Yes, this resolution authorizes a grant submission to DCNR for Phase 2 of the Low School Park Rehabilitation Project. And we originally planned to apply for both Youngs Woods and Low School Park, but DCNR will only accept one application for one park. So based on the recommendation of the Recreation Commission, it was determined that Low School Park had the greater need. The request to DCNR is for a grant in the amount of $250,000, and this requires a 50% match, and that will come from 2020 CDBG funds. Scope of work for the project includes the construction of a pavilion with lighting and picnic tables, the installation of ADA accessible pathways to the pavilion and from Memorial Avenue, along with benches, the installation of LED low mount lighting along the pathways, the resurfacing of the basketball court, and possibly the revitalization of the community garden. And these Phase 2 improvements are based on the Williamsport City Parks Master Plan. You should have all received an updated concept plan from Larson Design. And I just want to note that if the city is awarded the funds from DCNR, we'll be asked to submit a final design plan. So we'll have a chance to modify the concept plan that's submitted with the application. But at least this concept plan will give you a general idea about the proposed improvements. And at this point, we're not sure whether there's interest in the community garden, but I do plan to mention it as part of the application. This application is due to DCNR on April 22nd, and it was reviewed by the Public Works Committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Young. Mrs. Katz, Public Works.
Yes, this did come to Public Works. We're really thrilled that this is going. We're going to have another park that's going to be really upgraded. It's a great neighborhood for this park to be in, and this was passed to the whole, passed on to the full body of council with a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Councilwoman Katz. Questions or comments from other council members?
If I might, Mr. Allison, just quick, I've had a conversation with Stephanie on Monday related to this grant application, only because perhaps out of all of us on city council, I've been a community garden member for the last 10 or 15 years down there at Lowe's. So as it turned out, once I started talking to Stephanie, I had a lot of opinions on this grant application and what I thought the park needed. But it's a good application, and the park definitely needs more of our attention. It's a heavily utilized park in a neighborhood that is generally speaking, maybe a little bit underserved in terms of park space. And so I'm glad to see us putting some more time and attention into the park. And I was also glad to hear that obviously when and if we are awarded the grant funds, we'll have an opportunity to sort of further fine tune our goals in the park and have another look at exactly what we want to see move forward there. I think that it is I think it would be a wise idea for us to put some thought into improvements that we're making to the park. That's one of the few parks we have in the city with, well, not few, but that park has a pretty heavily utilized basketball court that we're planning to resurface, and I think that's an excellent idea. And also some very heavily utilized playground facilities, and I think we have the opportunity to really have a pretty nice impact on the lives of a bunch of kids and young adults in that neighborhood. So we need to put a lot of thought into that as we move forward. I'm excited to see the cost estimates from Larson when they come down and see how feasible what we're currently planning to do is in the park area. But thank you, Stephanie, for taking care of this. Stephanie, can I ask you one question?
Sure.
Has the city ever, talk to me a little bit about our DCNR grant application process. I know that we work usually with Wes Farringer,
Right.
DCNR, and I had looked a couple of months ago at grant awards through this particular grant round, or last year's round of these grants, and was surprised to see that there are especially larger municipalities in Pennsylvania that submit and receive more than one grant application. Have we ever done that? Have we ever been successful with that? Is that something we should be thinking about doing, or do we feel as though we're?
You mean applying for two at one time?
Yeah.
We haven't, I mean, the last time that we applied for Low School Park, we also put in an application for Youngs. And they accepted it. And I did talk to Wes about that. And he said that at this point, they're only accepting one application for one park. Now, whether or not I could put in, two totally separate projects that aren't, maybe one's a park and something else is a trail or something like that, I don't know. Because we just, we have our urban parks and that's really what our focus is. But I did talk to Wes about that because the intention was to apply for both. And he said that it's really not something that they do anymore.
Got it.
Focused on the one project.
Got it. But this grant source breaks down into money potentially for parks, but also I think for land acquisition and for a handful of other things, correct? So we could, I guess what I'm asking is.
Different category probably may work.
Okay. I guess what I'm asking is, and maybe you could simply ask Mr. Farringer this if next time you communicate with him, to what extent are we hurting our own chances if we are applying under two different arms of the grant process for funding? Are we just putting in competing applications, or does a municipality the size of ours have a chance at actually receiving funding for two different initiatives in the city at the same time? Because it's not that we have a lot of needs, and DCNR has certainly been generous with us in the past, but I think it would bear some consideration to look at other areas that these grants can cover, and not just the parks areas if it's an option for us. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments from council tonight? Hearing none. On the motion then, Mrs. Frank, please.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes. And motion passes 7-0. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. We'll move to item 15, I'm sorry, resolution of City Council authorizing Chodo agreement. Could you read that in short form, please, Mrs. Frank?
Resolution of the City Council of the City of Williamsport authorizing execution of 2018 Chodo agreement between the City of Williamsport and Greater Lycoming Habitat for Humanity in the amount of $70,000.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion,
So moved.
council?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Mrs. Young.
Yes, this resolution obligates $70,000 of 2018 home funds to the Greater Lycoming Habitat for Humanity for the construction of a single-family home located at 702 Diamond Street. The home program rules require that the city commit a minimum of 15% of its annual home allocation to a certified community housing development organization, better known as a CHODO. We're allocating more than our minimum requirement, but it's necessary to ensure that the project has sufficient funding. The construction costs are estimated to be $142,000. $55,000 of Lycoming County Fair funds has also been committed, and Habitat's providing $17,000 toward the project. The home funds will be used for eligible construction costs, tap-on fees, and a developer's fee. Habitat will then sell the home at an affordable price to an income-eligible household that has an income at or below 80% of the median area income. This agreement was reviewed by the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Young. Ms. Mealy?
Yes, this agreement was reviewed by the Finance Committee and forwarded to the full body of council with a positive recommendation. We've previously had a handful of discussions with Habitat in the Economic Revitalization Committee as well regarding this item and general Habitat projects moving forward. Of note, this because of certain specific elements of the site in question on this one, the home will require a basement, which is not a standard feature of Habitat homes. Part of the reason that they were seeking additional TOTO funding above and beyond what we would usually provide for the project. The project, according to Alice Schuster and Tom Stephanie, how do you pronounce his last name?
I have to look. I wrote it down because it's
Something along the lines of Salamchik.
yeah, that's
Anyway.
Solansic. Yep, Solansic.
Okay. They do already have a family that is interested in committing for this home, and they have secured the amount of financing that they need to bridge the gap from their Habitat fundraising. So the project is good to go as soon as they know that they have all the funding in place. We had a timeline in the packet that we received that, sorry, something's going on with my Zoom here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Everybody zoomed out.
Yeah, interesting. So we had a timeline in the pack that we received from Habitat. They say that they are at this point, the timeline could be updated. The project is at this point shovel ready. They are just waiting on the COVID-19 restrictions to be lifted before they begin work on the project. So, so I think they're basically good to go. Ideally by May 1st, but whenever those restrictions are lifted, both within the city and within the state. Okay, as I said, it was forwarded to the full body of council with a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Mealy. Other questions or comments from other council members? Hearing none. I just have one. Mrs. Young, was this is this a lot that there was a fire at an existing house and it was then torn down?
I don't know.
Okay. Okay, well, it just seemed to trigger something in my mind, but in any case, I'm glad we're getting a nice family home there. And
Randy, I believe there
it'll be-
was a fire on this lot, but I'm not quite positive, but I think that was part of the discussion that we had at ERC.
Okay, good. Then Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
yes,
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. We will move to item 16, resolution authorizing the hiring of a police officer. In short form, please, Mrs. Frank.
Resolution authorizing the Williamsport Bureau of Police to hire one police officer, Kristen Wright.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion?
So moved.
A
Second.
I heard a motion. Was there a second?
Second, I think there was.
Okay, thank you. Motion is second. Chief Hagan, welcome tonight.
Welcome, President Allison, Vice President Mealy, members of council and the administration. Please welcome also Kristen Wright, trooper with the Arizona Department of Public Safety tonight. Good evening, Kristen. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Kristen is number 5 on our civil service list from 2019. She is a veteran law enforcement officer. As you see in the packet that I submitted, she has more than 10 years of experience total. Initially in the state of Georgia, four of those years there were undercover, and then also for several years now in the state of Arizona. She is currently a drill instructor at the State Police Academy, or the Department of Public Safety Academy in Arizona. Kristen is originally from Montgomery. She's 37 years of age and is a drug recognition, and again, like I said, an academy drill instructor among many other specialties. We feel that we were very lucky to have her returning home and wanting to come back and work in this area. And so I discussed this hiring before the Finance Committee earlier in the week, and Kristen's name was forwarded, and this packet was forwarded to the full body of council with a positive recommendation. I for a start date, and that has been approved by the administration. So our goal would be to hire her by June 1st. And then soon after that, she will take a certification test through the Municipal Police Officers Education and Training Commission, MOPEC. As soon as she's certified there and qualifies with her weapon, she will be starting our field training program here. I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Chief Hagan. This was reviewed in finance, I believe. Ms. Mealy?
Yes, this was reviewed in finance, and the chief speaks the truth. It was forwarded to the full body of council with the positive recommendation. Ms. Ms. Wright, it's nice to see you. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
It's kind of an awkward format, and we apologize. Usually we'd all welcome you in person, but probably it's for the best that we won't be able to do that this time. Anyway, we did have some discussions with the chief. Most of the discussions centered around our hiring plan within the police department moving forward. We were excited to hear that Ms. Wright is, of course, a seasoned officer, and that she'll be able to get on the force and replace some of the retirements that we have here very shortly. The chief also informed us that the other hire that we approved a handful of weeks ago, who was not Act 120 certified, has not, of course, unsurprisingly, has not been able to attend the police academy that we had initially expected to send him to. However, he's now going to, I think, go to a slightly less expensive academy that is also shorter. So in the end, it may work out well for us. The predominant focus of the Finance Committee discussion was about upcoming hires in the department, particularly related to the budgetary uncertainties that we're facing, obviously, right now in the city. We know that there's a lot of federal funding and to a certain extent state funding being made available as part of the COVID-19 response. We also know that the city will have additional expenditures related to that same issue. And so the finance committee, I think, recommended some caution both in new hires and expenditures within the city, only because we're not quite certain where this month and a half or longer of time that we're dealing with COVID-19 and all the pandemic restrictions, how that will impact our budget in 2020. Obviously, the budget that we put together at the end of 2019 is much more in flux at this point than any one of us would have anticipated. And so that I think was the only recommendation to come out of the finance committee. We obviously approved, well, we obviously recommended the hiring of Ms. Wright to the full body of council, but we did also recommend caution on the part of the administration in terms of any sort of long-term financial decisions when we're still uncertain of the overall impact of the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mealy. Are there comments by other council members? Mrs. Katz?
Yes, I'd just like to welcome Kristen to our city and make sure you keep safe. Okay, I'm looking forward to meeting you in person.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Other comments from council? I can't see everybody, so just speak up.
So Chief,
I just want to say
apologies, Council
go-
President Allison. Chief
Go
Hagan, I
ahead.
just had a quick question about where Police Officer A falls in the ranking structure for the police department.
Police Officer A in the last year of the contract is the bottom of our pay structure. The only rank that exists below that is the one recently approved by council last year, which is Police Officer A Cadet. And Police Officer A Cadet applies to someone who has not been to the academy and or is not yet certified. Trooper Wright is not or will not be a cadet as a police officer here. She's been certified for as a police officer from another state for well over 2 years and is just simply going to come here, take a test, and become a police officer A. So she will not serve as a cadet. She will make the full wage. It's a little bit more than $50,000 a year to start. As you know, as we've discussed before, the cadet wage is half of that until they graduate the academy, but that won't apply to her.
Thank you, Chief, and welcome aboard.
Are there any other comments? I just wanted to also welcome you aboard, Ms. Wright. We're very fortunate to have somebody of your ability and experience, and also someone who's familiar with the area. It's all a big plus for us. And so welcome aboard, soon to be Officer Wright, and you'll have your chance to join the ranks of those that protect and serve in the city of Williamsport. And we're looking forward to it.
Thank you so much.
for stepping up. You're welcome. We'll have the vote then, Mrs. Frank, please.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes,
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. We'll move on to item 17. Resolution awarding aggregate bids, which this is something we approved last meeting, but we're actually voting on it tonight. In short form, please, Mrs. Frank.
A resolution awarding the aggregate bids for the city of Williamsport.
Mr. Allison, if I could interrupt for one moment.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say the captioning is working in Zoom right now, but occasionally it stops going out. There is a link on the city website about halfway down, right under where it says live stream. It says link to cart. If someone goes to that and clicks on that, it will have the full transcript that is actively being updated as well if it goes out on the actual stream itself. And going forward, we'll
Okay.
have both options available.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks for that explanation.
Sure.
Yes, thank you for that, Mr. Cooley. We're gonna get there. We're not gonna give up till we get it right. So we have a motion and a second. Mr. Winder.
Good evening. For your review is a resolution to approve the purchase of aggregate supplies through the West Branch COG aggregate cooperative purchasing contract. What it is the annual bidding process we use, merging with multiple municipalities to get the lowest possible price on different materials used by the streets department, from 2A sub base to high performance cold patch, anti-skid, etc. It is an estimate of what we think we'll use within the year. There is no guarantee to the vendor that we will use that much. So if we only, for instance, if we put the bid out for 10,000 tons and we only use 5,000 tons, that's all we pay for. All of these materials are purchased under liquid fuels. As I said, it's an annual resolution that comes before council. It did go before the Public Works Committee and passed on with a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Winder. Mrs. Katz.
Yes, it did come before Public Works, and this is a yearly resolution that comes to us. And this year was kind of amazing how little we have used, but we never know what next year will bring. Well, it isn't next year, maybe in the fall what will bring. This was passed on to the full body of council with a positive recommendation. It's one of those necessary evils that we have to put forth every year.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Mrs. Katz. Questions or comments from council tonight? I think we pretty much knew what this was. Thank you, Mr. Winder. Could we have the vote, please, Mrs. Frank?
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes,
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. We'll move to item 18 then. Resolution certifying a local match. Could you read that in short form, please, Mrs. Frank?
Resolution certifying the local match for state operating financial assistance.
Thank you. Is there a motion in a second?
so moved.
Second.
There's the motion in a second. Welcome again, Mr. Winder.
This is an annual resolution. It is required by the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation as part of RVT's annual state operating financial assistance grant for fiscal year 2021 or 2021, I'm sorry. As set forth in the resolution, RVT must provide a minimum local match of $426,204 to receive Act 89, Section 1513 funds in the amount of $4,642,549. The local match comes from the the local shares that from all the surrounding municipalities and different businesses throughout the area that we serve. And this was reviewed by finance and moved forward with a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Winder. It was reviewed by finance. Ms. Mealy?
It was reviewed by finance and forwarded to the full body of council with a positive recommendation. This is, Mr. Winder neglected to mention, a standard resolution, one that we pass every year. And the only item of note is that until our match for the grant is 15%, the amount of our match will continue to increase annually. What that means is we need to either find new partners to make that match increase a reality, or we need to increase the share from each of the existing partners or from some of the existing partners. In this case, I think because we're not looking at any particular expansion of River Valley Transit Services this year that I'm aware of, Mr. Winder, please correct me if I'm wrong, that we may be looking for a small increase in the share from some of the partners that we have on this application. That said, it has been 20 years, 15 years, 20 years since we increased any of the shares.
We did research it, and as far back as we can tell is no increase since 2007.
Okay, so not quite that long, but 12 or 13 years since we had any increases, and consequently, that's a pretty good run. And I think that at this point, asking for a slight increase in local match from a handful of our partners wouldn't be out of line. That said, finance forwarded it to the full body of council with a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Mealy. Questions or comments from council tonight? Okay, I hear none.
Hey, Randy, I got a quick question. Adam, you said you did some research into that 13 years. That is a really good run. Is the lack of increase 100% because of the expansion of RVT, or were there other avenues that were identified that resulted in not having to increase the match?
On paper, there's nothing being shown. And looking at what the partners are currently paying, I'm not exactly sure what the thought process was. I mean, honestly, the city of Williamsport is paying the highest portion at not quite 50%. I would be more than willing to do a little more research and try to get you that answer.
Yeah, the only reason I ask is just, as I think that a number of people are still familiarizing themselves with RVT specifically, there might be something out there that could still be available that would minimize or eliminate the need to increase partner shares. And I think that would be really good to try to identify and figure out.
Definitely, yes.
It looked like, Mr. Pavlak, were you raising your hand to say something?
Just on my knowledge, I believe it's additional partners were added. So the shares for each of the partners that were existing remained the same. We were able to increase our needs based on additional partners.
Thank you, Mr. Pavlak. Other questions or comments? Well, hearing none, we'll have the vote then. Mrs. Frank?
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
yes,
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yeah, yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. And we'll move to another item for Mr. Winder. Resolution by municipality certifying provision of local match. Mrs. Frank, in short form, please.
Resolution by municipality certifying provision of local match for state operating financial assistance.
Thank you. Is there a motion and a second?
so move,
Second.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Mr. Winder again.
This is another annual resolution. It is required by PennDOT and is a companion to the previous resolution. As set forth in this resolution, RVT will invoice the city of Williamsport in November 2020 and May 2021 for this required local share. The municipalities' jurisdictions served by RVT will be then invoiced for their required local share to reimburse the city. So in November 30th, 2020, it will be $213,102. May 31st, 2021, it will be $213,102. This resolution basically solidifies that the city of Williamsport guarantees that local match. And this was reviewed by council and passed on with a positive recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Winder. Ms. Mealy?
Yes, this was reviewed by the Finance Committee and passed with a positive recommendation. There's not much to add here. We see this one every year as well.
We do. Comments or questions from other council members? I can see none and I hear none. So we'll have the vote, please, Mrs. Frank.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
yes,
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes,
Mr. Allison.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. And thank you, Mrs. Frank. We will move to item 20, resolution authorizing the execution of a capital grant application. In short form, please, Mrs. Frank.
Resolution consolidation capital grant application, resolution to file application and to certify local match.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is it motion and a second, please?
so move,
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Mr. Winder is the third item here.
The attached resolution is required to be submitted to the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation as part of RVT's consolidated capital grant application for fiscal year 2019-2020. As set forth in the resolution, RVT must provide a minimum local match of $23,673 to match requested state section 1514 bond funds and section 1514 discretionary funds in the amount of $710,327 as indicated in the attached grant funding summary page. These amounts would be the maximum anticipated amount if all the capital projects submitted by RVT to PennDOT were approved and funded. Along with your resolution, you'll have a document showing what projects were approved. The grant application for this portion was done in April of 2019 is when it was submitted for the 1920 year. It does cover quite a few areas. It would cover an ADA accessible van, which would be a CNG to meet the increased in ADA ridership, a forklift replacement. We currently have a over 30-year-old forklift, which is heavily used by River Valley Transit to move heavy components, bus parts, etc. It would be used for garage bay doors on an open building that we currently have out back to secure 6 support vehicles in there. IT upgrades, which would be expand infrastructure on the fleet itself. Parking lot resurfacing, which the parking lot here is heavily traveled in the areas of the gas pumps, etc., due to servicing the fuel needs of multiple agencies. It has not been resurfaced since 2013. A lot of cracks, a lot of deterioration to the parking lot area. It would also replace one 30-foot bus, number 910. It is 10 years old. It would replace a diesel with a new CNG. It would also replace 2 buses currently that are diesel with CNG buses, and those 2 would be 35 foot in length. And numerous shop equipment for the ever-changing needs of the mechanics to keep maintaining the current fleet and the new fleet coming in. It was reviewed by finance and passed on with a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Winder. Ms. Mealy, Finance.
Yes, everything Adam says is true. Finance did review it and pass it with a positive recommendation. Ms. Nicole Farr was on with Adam when he presented this item to us and assured us that the funding, both the 426,000 that we need for the match for the previous grant application, and also the $23,000 match outlined in this resolution, is funding that we already have in place. So there won't be any issue with making that funding a reality should it be necessary. Mr. Winder, one quick question for you that did not occur to me the other day. It seems to me that when we saw this same application last year and for several years previous, we have included a walking bridge from Trade and Transit 1 to the Church Street parking deck.
Yes.
I do not see that on the current application, and I'm assuming we've finally given up on that project.
The state denied it for another year, so we just chose to remove it from the items.
Okay, I think that was wise. I'm happy to see it gone. I just looked at the form and thought, wait a minute, I remember there was something I used to think was a bad idea on this form. So good. All right. Anyway, it's a relatively modest application that I think is at this point primarily full of things that we need, perhaps more than things that we want. And you know, perhaps over the next year or so, we'll come up with a handful of things that we want as well, just in case we happen to be able to receive some extra funding. But anyway, the match is in place, and the Finance Committee forwarded this to the full body of council with a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Mealy. Other comments or questions?
No.
Okay. I don't hear any. And I agree, I'm happy the walkway is not there. Mrs. Frank will have the vote then, please.
Mrs. Frank isn't on. Solicitor Lubin is going to do the vote.
Okay. Mr. Lubin.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes, Norm.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
President Allison.
Yes,
Did you get Mr. Mackey?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Mackey.
Thanks, Norm. Yes.
I believe that's 7-0.
Yep.
And motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Lubin. We will move to item 21, resolution to approve an agreement for website design and development service, which has been tabled. Is there a motion from anyone on council?
Hey, Brandy,
Yes.
before we decide to remove from table or anything like that, are we able to hear from Liz on the finance committee feedback?
Mr. Lubin, do we have to take this off the table to
You're going to
discuss?
discuss it, you should take it off the table.
I don't have any more discussion on it.
Neither do I.
Me neither.
Okay, remains, I don't hear any motion that remains tabled then. Okay, we'll move to item 22. Except for filing historic preservation minutes of 11/18/19, public works meeting minutes of 11/19/19 and 12/03/19, finance committee meetings of 11/5, 12/3, and 12/10, all in 2019. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion or questions, corrections? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank, on the motion, please.
Yeah.
Or Norm, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Miss Muley,
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you, Mr. Lubin. Announcements. The next regularly scheduled city council meeting will be held on Thursday, April 30th, 2020 at 6:30 p.m. Hope to be sharp. Right here on Zoom. Upcoming meetings, Tuesday, April 21st, 10 a.m. blighted property. 6:30 p.m. Harb. Wednesday, April 22nd, 11:30 a.m. Redevelopment Authority. Friday, April 24th, 11 a.m. ERC Committee. Monday, April 27th, 11 a.m. Historic Preservation. Tuesday, April 28th, 11:30 a.m. Public Safety Meeting. Tuesday, April 28th, 1 p.m. Finance, and 2:30 p.m. Public Works. That's all for our announcements there. Are there, I did announce we're having an executive session. Questions or comments from council members tonight?
I have a quick one, Randy, if that's all right.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that it is 7:43 p.m. and we began our 6:30 meeting actually closer to 6:45, and we have covered 20 some agenda items this evening. All of which is to say that I think the Zoom thing is finally catching on a little bit. I think we're doing all right. And Randy, I wanted to thank you because I know that well, you and Chris Cooley in particular, and all of us to a certain extent, have worked really hard to make this this new public meeting format a reality. And it's been a real uphill battle for all of us. So thanks to everyone who's put time into it. Randy and Chris, thanks in particular to both of you. It's paying off. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chris does all the heavy lifting, so I defer to him on all the thanks, but you're all doing a great job on council and the administration as well. Appreciate everybody adapting to different circumstances, but that's the age we live in. It's times of rapid change when we need to be flexible, and we're doing the best we can with that. And the public as well. I thank them for forbearing through this. It's a new format, and not everybody's familiar and comfortable with technology of different kinds. We wish we could make it easier, but this is what we have to deal with, and we thank the public for understanding as well. Comments from the administration tonight?
No, I don't have any, Randy.
Okay, I don't hear anything. And so we come to the public comment time for those who have emailed in. Mr. Cooley, could you read the email address again?
The address is publiccomment@cityofwilliamsport.org.
And do we have anybody queued up yet?
Yes, we do, and Mr. Lubin has those.
Okay.
Jackson. The first one is from Misty Dion, D-I-O-N. And her comment was that the captioning was not working, but this came in before Chris talked or mentioned during the meeting about the captioning was working,
right,
or up at that point. Second one is from Karen Koch, K-O-C-H. And her comment was, it was nice to hear Mayor Slaughter join today's monthly CAO call this morning. The mayor offered the services of the city police department to assist seniors and others unable to access public transit to get necessary prescriptions and groceries. And that was our question, seemed to be, how or who does a person contact to utilize this service? How will this work? For example, how will the police officer pay for a person's items? If the person uses SNAP benefits, will the officer pick up their benefit card prior to making the purchase? Will there be set days of the week or specific hours that this service will be available? Thank you for your clarification. And it appears this comment is more directed toward the mayor than toward city council.
Yeah, well, that's fine.
The next was from Marie Prince, and this also was about having problems with the captioning. And indicated that when they had their staff meeting, they had trouble signing on. She had trouble signing on to a tablet. And then also thought maybe YouTube had something to do with it. If you look at the bottom, some subtitle. But I think Mr. Cooley again addressed these issues earlier. The next one is from Jody Bainey, B-A-N-E-Y. And her question was, I was wondering if the city has any resources for PPE. We have direct care workers in the county providing care without this equipment. We are in need of basic supplies such as paper towels, soap, hand sanitizers, gloves, gowns, and masks. Thank you. And I don't know if she was asking on behalf of the Center for Independent Living or just talking about the city providing these in general. And the final one was from Karen Koch, K-O-C-H. And her comment was actually about the tabled item on the website. And her statement was, there has been much conversation regarding hiring a consultant to design a website. Much time at the council meeting on April the 2nd and the Public Works meeting on April the 14th was spent discussing this matter. I believe the potential consultant is an instructor at Penn College. I know nothing about this man's credentials, so I asked, does he assure that his website design will be accessible? Will this design comply with the ADA? And she says, thank you. Being the item was tabled, this is still within the administration. And that was the final one that was received.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lubin. I'm glad that that format's accessible. So that's an improvement as well. So I think that concludes our meeting for this evening. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, council.